50 years ago, Captain James Mitchell took off from Edwards Air Force Base on what should have been a routine transport mission through the Sierra Nevada mountains. His plane carried classified cargo bound for a top-secret facility in Nevada. Neither the pilot nor his aircraft were ever seen again. The official report listed mechanical failure as the probable cause. Search teams combed thousands of square miles of treacherous terrain but found nothing. No wreckage, no distress signals, no trace of what happened to Flight 447. The case went cold, filed away with other wartime mysteries. But last month, a rock climber exploring remote caves made an impossible discovery. Behind a concealed entrance, perfectly preserved in the dry mountain air, sat Captain Mitchell's transport plane. The cargo hold remained sealed. Personal effects lay exactly where they fell. And tucked beneath the pilot's seat was a leather-bound diary that would rewrite Cold War history. What secret was worth making a man and his mission disappear forever? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Alex Torres had been climbing these mountains for 15 years, but he'd never seen anything like the narrow fissure hidden behind the granite overhang. The experienced rock climber from Sacramento had come to the remote Sierra Nevada peaks seeking new routes, not expecting to stumble into history. The cave entrance was barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through, concealed so perfectly that only the unusual echo of his voice had revealed its existence. Alex had been calling to his climbing partner when the sound bounced back differently, suggesting empty space where solid rock should be. Inside, his headlamp beams swept across an impossibly preserved scene. The aircraft sat level on the cave floor, its military gray paint barely faded after 5 decades. No rust, no decay. The dry mountain air had mummified everything exactly as it was left. Alex's hands trembled as he approached the cockpit. Through the cracked windscreen, he could see the pilot's seat, still occupied. Scattered across the instrument panel were personal effects. A thermos, a photograph, and what appeared to be a leather journal. The cargo hold drew his attention next. Heavy cases secured with military-grade locks filled the rear compartment. Whatever Captain Mitchell had been transporting, someone had considered it valuable enough to seal behind multiple layers of security. Alex photographed everything before touching anything, his photographer's instincts overriding his curiosity. The images would document the scene exactly as he'd found it, preserving evidence that might prove crucial. The pilot's personal effects told a story of preparation and desperation. Maps marked with alternate routes, emergency supplies carefully rationed, and most significantly, a set of military dog tags that confirmed the impossible. Captain James Mitchell, missing for 50 years, had survived his disappearance long enough to establish this hidden refuge. Alex carefully extracted the dog tags, noting their condition. Corroded but readable, they bore Mitchell's name, rank, and service number. After decades of speculation about the pilot's fate, here was definitive proof of his identity and his final resting place. The leather journal proved too fragile for immediate examination. Alex wrapped it carefully in his spare shirt, understanding that its contents might explain mysteries that had puzzled investigators for half a century. Outside the cave, Alex's satellite phone finally found signal. His first call went to the Mono County Sheriff's Department, though he struggled to explain the magnitude of his discovery. How do you describe finding a perfectly preserved aircraft that's been missing since 1974? The dispatcher transferred him to Sheriff Deputy Maria Santos, who listened skeptically to Alex's report. Cold case discoveries weren't uncommon in the mountains, but usually involved hikers finding bone fragments or rusted equipment, not intact aircraft with classified cargo. Within hours, Alex found himself coordinating with a response team that included county officials, federal investigators, and a historian specializing in Cold War mysteries. Dr. Sarah Chun arrived that evening, her academic credentials in military history making her the natural choice to lead the investigation. Sarah examined Alex's photographs with growing excitement. The aircraft's tail number matched Flight 447's registration, confirming they'd found Captain Mitchell's missing transport. But the preservation raised questions that challenged everything the official reports had claimed about his disappearance. This wasn't a crash, Sarah observed. studying images of the aircraft's intact landing gear. The plane was flown here deliberately, landed in this cave by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The implications staggered Alex. If Mitchell had deliberately hidden his aircraft, rather than crashing due to mechanical failure, then everything the military had reported about his mission was suspect. The captain had been trying to preserve something: his cargo, his life, or perhaps the truth about what he'd been ordered to transport. Sarah's preliminary examination of the cargo containers revealed sophisticated locking mechanisms far beyond standard military security. Whatever Mitchell had been carrying required protection that suggested extraordinary value or danger. As night fell around the mountain cave, Alex realized his climbing expedition had uncovered more than just a missing aircraft. They'd found evidence of a deliberate cover-up that had lasted 50 years, maintained by people who considered Captain Mitchell's cargo important enough to let a man and his mission vanish without trace. The investigation was just beginning, but already Sarah's team faced resistance from federal agencies claiming jurisdiction over the site. Someone wanted this discovery contained, just as they'd contained Mitchell's disappearance decades earlier. Alex's mountaineering adventure had become the key to unlocking one of the Cold War's most carefully guarded secrets. Sarah Chun assembled her investigation team at the makeshift base camp established near the cave entrance. As a military historian specializing in Cold War operations, she'd examined dozens of classified incidents, but nothing had prepared her for the implications of Mitchell's discovery. The team included forensic specialists from the FBI, aircraft investigators from the NTSB, and a document preservation expert from the Smithsonian. Each brought unique expertise to unraveling a mystery that had officially been closed for 50 years. Inside the aircraft, the cargo manifest lay partially burned beneath the pilot's seat, its edges charred but crucial information still legible. Sarah photographed each fragment before the preservation team carefully extracted the document for laboratory analysis. The manifest revealed cargo designation, Project Icarus, Material Recovery Operation. The terminology was unfamiliar to Sarah's team, but the classification level exceeded anything they'd encountered in declassified Cold War archives. Whatever Mitchell had been transporting required security clearances that suggested national security implications. The aircraft's condition puzzled the NTSB investigators. No signs of mechanical failure, no evidence of combat damage, and most significantly, landing gear deployment indicated controlled arrival rather than emergency crash. Captain Mitchell had piloted his aircraft into this cave with precision and purpose. Sarah's examination of the cockpit revealed systematic preparation for extended survival. Emergency food supplies had been rationed and consumed over weeks, not days. Water collection systems improvised from aircraft components suggested Mitchell had planned for long-term concealment. He hadn't stumbled into this cave seeking emergency shelter. He'd chosen it as a deliberate hiding place. The cargo containers themselves proved more challenging. Military-grade locks required specialized equipment to open without destroying potential evidence inside. The FBI's technical team photographed the locking mechanisms, noting security features that exceeded standard military protocols. While waiting for lock specialists, Sarah researched Captain Mitchell's service record through military archives. His file revealed an exemplary career spanning 23 years, with security clearances that would have granted access to highly classified operations. Mitchell wasn't a typical transport pilot. His credentials suggested involvement in special operations requiring absolute discretion. Sarah's contact at the Pentagon, Colonel Frank Morrison, initially cooperated with her investigation. Morrison had served as Mitchell's commanding officer and remembered the pilot's final mission briefing. But when Sarah pressed for details about Project Icarus, Morrison's demeanor changed dramatically. Some operations remain classified for good reasons, Morrison warned during their phone conversation. Captain Mitchell understood the sensitivity of his assignment. His disappearance was thoroughly investigated and officially resolved. Morrison's reluctance to discuss specifics raised red flags for Sarah's team. Military officials typically welcomed opportunities to provide closure for missing personnel cases. Morrison's evasiveness suggested active suppression rather than normal classification protocols. The partially burned manifest contained shipping codes that referenced facilities Sarah couldn't identify through standard military databases. The destinations appeared to be research installations that didn't appear in any official records her team could access through normal channels. Government resistance to the investigation became apparent when federal agencies began claiming jurisdiction over the cave site. The Air Force asserted authority over the aircraft as military property, while other agencies demanded access to the classified cargo. Sarah found herself navigating bureaucratic obstacles designed to limit rather than facilitate investigation. The preservation experts' preliminary examination of Mitchell's personal effects revealed systematic documentation efforts. The pilot had photographed his cargo before departure, carefully documenting what he'd been ordered to transport. Hidden cameras in the cockpit had recorded loading procedures that violated standard military protocols. Sarah realized Mitchell had been conducting his own investigation, documenting irregularities in his final mission that suggested awareness of its controversial nature. The pilot had suspected something about his cargo that motivated him to preserve evidence rather than complete his assigned delivery. The burnt manifest's legible sections referenced recovery operations at multiple locations across the southwestern United States. The terminology suggested retrieval rather than transportation of newly manufactured materials. Mitchell had been collecting something, not delivering military supplies to Allied facilities. As Sarah's team worked to unlock the cargo containers, government pressure intensified. Legal challenges threatened to halt the investigation before they could examine the materials Mitchell had died protecting. Someone with significant authority wanted this discovery contained, just as they'd contained Mitchell's disappearance 50 years earlier. The investigation was revealing layers of deception that extended far beyond one missing pilot. Mitchell's cargo represented something so sensitive that government agencies preferred maintaining a 50-year cover-up rather than risking public disclosure. Sarah understood that opening those cargo containers would either vindicate Mitchell's sacrifice or expose her team to the same suppression that had silenced the captain decades earlier. The burned manifest was just the beginning of secrets that powerful people had killed to protect. The Smithsonian's document preservation specialist worked through the night, carefully separating pages of Mitchell's leather-bound diary that had fused together over 5 decades. Each page revealed in the laboratory's controlled environment brought Sarah's team closer to understanding the pilot's final weeks. Mitchell's handwriting remained remarkably legible, preserved by the cave's dry atmosphere. His entries began 3 weeks before his disappearance, documenting growing unease about his assignment to Project Icarus. The pilot's concerns weren't about flight safety or mechanical issues. They focused on the nature of what he'd been ordered to transport. Command briefed me on material recovery from Nevada Site 7, Mitchell had written. Cargo description remains classified above my clearance level. Transport manifest lists weight and handling requirements, but nothing about origin or composition. Colonel Morrison seems nervous about this assignment. Hidden within the cockpit's instrument panel, Sarah's team discovered a collection of personal letters Mitchell had written to his wife Helen but never sent. The letters revealed a devoted husband struggling with professional obligations that conflicted with his moral convictions. Helen, my darling, one letter began. I wish I could tell you about the doubts keeping me awake at night. This mission feels different from anything I've transported before. The scientists at the briefing wouldn't meet my eyes when discussing handling procedures. Whatever I'm carrying, they're afraid of it. The unsent letters painted a picture of a man caught between duty and conscience. Mitchell had dedicated his career to serving his country, but his final assignment challenged everything he believed about military honor and transparency. His growing suspicion that Project Icarus involved activities that violated both military ethics and civilian oversight had tormented him during his final weeks. Sarah arranged to meet with Helen Mitchell, now 89 and living in a retirement community outside Phoenix. Despite her advanced age, Helen's memory of her husband's final days remained sharp and detailed. She'd suspected for 50 years that the official explanation for his disappearance concealed more troubling truths. James wasn't the same after that final briefing, Helen remembered during Sarah's visit. He'd always shared stories about his flights, even the classified ones in general terms. But those last few weeks he barely spoke about work at all. He'd sit at our kitchen table, staring at papers he couldn't discuss, looking like a man wrestling with his soul. Helen revealed that Mitchell had made unusual preparations before his final mission. He'd updated their life insurance policies, organized important documents, and most significantly, had taught her how to access his personal safe if something happened to him. At the time, Helen had attributed his behavior to normal military caution, but looking back, she recognized it as systematic preparation for potential disappearance. The letters hidden in Mitchell's cockpit expressed his growing realization that Project Icarus involved technology that government scientists couldn't explain or control. His transportation missions had taken him to research facilities conducting experiments that challenged conventional understanding of physics and engineering. "The materials I've been transporting aren't manufactured," Mitchell had written to Helen. "They're recovered from somewhere else, somewhere the briefing officers won't identify. The scientists study them like archaeologists examining artifacts from a civilization they don't understand." Mitchell's diary entries revealed his decision to document everything about his final mission. Hidden cameras installed in his aircraft would record cargo loading procedures, while personal notes would preserve details that official reports might suppress or distort. The pilot had transformed himself into an investigative journalist, determined to preserve truth regardless of personal consequences. Helen's testimony provided crucial context for understanding Mitchell's state of mind during his final weeks. Her husband hadn't been suffering from mental breakdown or paranoid delusions. He'd been a rational military officer responding to evidence that his government was concealing discoveries of extraordinary significance. The unsent letters revealed Mitchell's internal struggle between loyalty to his military oath and responsibility to preserve truth for future generations. He'd recognized that completing his mission meant participating in a cover-up that might deny humanity access to revolutionary technological knowledge. Sarah's examination of the letters revealed Mitchell's growing conviction that the American people deserved to know what their government had discovered and was hiding from them. His decision to disappear rather than complete his delivery represented the ultimate act of whistleblowing, sacrificing his life to preserve evidence of government deception. The investigation team now understood that Mitchell's disappearance hadn't been an accident or equipment failure. It had been a deliberate act of conscience by a military officer who chose truth over orders, even knowing that choice would cost him everything he valued most. The cargo containers finally yielded to the FBI's specialized lockpicking equipment after 3 days of careful work. Sarah's team gathered around the first opened case, their excitement tempered by uncertainty about what 50 years of secrecy had been protecting. Inside, nestled in custom foam padding, lay components that defied immediate classification. The objects appeared metallic but exhibited properties that challenged conventional materials science. Despite 5 decades in storage, they showed no signs of corrosion, oxidation, or degradation that should have occurred in natural materials. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the aerospace engineer Sarah had recruited for the investigation, examined the components with growing amazement. Her expertise in advanced materials and propulsion systems provided the technical knowledge needed to understand Mitchell's cargo, but what she discovered challenged everything she knew about 1970s technology. "These alloys shouldn't exist," Elena murmured, running spectrographic analysis on the prototype electronic component that had caught her attention. "The molecular structure suggests manufacturing techniques we've only theoretical knowledge of today, let alone 50 years ago. The component's design incorporated engineering principles that contemporary science was just beginning to understand. Microscopic examination revealed construction methods that required precision manufacturing capabilities far beyond anything available in 1974. The technology represented a quantum leap that should have taken decades of gradual development to achieve." Elena's analysis suggested the components had been reverse-engineered from something even more advanced. The manufacturing bore hallmarks of attempts to recreate superior technology using inferior methods and materials. Like trying to build a computer chip using Stone Age tools, the results were impressive but clearly approximations of something far more sophisticated. The implications staggered Sarah's investigation team. If the government had possessed this technology in 1974, why hadn't it revolutionized American industry and military capabilities? The answer seemed to be that officials couldn't understand what they'd recovered well enough to implement it effectively. Sarah examined the cargo manifest's technical specifications, comparing them to Elena's findings. The weight distributions and handling requirements made sense only if the materials exhibited properties that conventional physics couldn't explain. Mitchell had been transporting technology that violated basic assumptions about how matter and energy interact. The second cargo container revealed documentation that provided disturbing context for the mysterious components. Technical manuals written in multiple languages attempted to explain operational principles for technology that clearly wasn't human in origin. The writing styles suggested desperate attempts by scientists to comprehend discoveries that challenged fundamental understanding of reality. Elena's background in aerospace engineering allowed her to recognize propulsion concepts that NASA researchers had only begun exploring in recent years. The 1974 documentation described theoretical frameworks for manipulating gravitational fields and achieving faster-than-light travel that contemporary science still considered impossible. Whoever wrote these manuals was trying to reverse-engineer technology they didn't fully understand, Elena explained to Sarah's team. It's like finding Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks about helicopters, except these people were trying to build spacecraft using principles they could observe but not replicate. The third container held the most disturbing evidence yet. Biological samples preserved in specialized containment units suggested that Project Icarus involved more than just technological recovery. Whatever the government had found, it included organic materials that required extraordinary preservation measures. Elena's examination of the biological containment systems revealed technology more advanced than anything in contemporary laboratories. The preservation methods had maintained samples in perfect condition for 50 years using techniques that modern science couldn't duplicate or explain. Sarah realized that Mitchell's moral crisis had been fully justified. The pilot had been transporting evidence of discoveries that could revolutionize human understanding of science, technology, and humanity's place in the universe. Instead of sharing these discoveries with the scientific community, government officials had chosen secrecy and suppression. The cargo containers represented a treasury of knowledge that could have accelerated human development by decades. Medical breakthroughs, energy solutions, transportation innovations, all had been hidden away while humanity struggled with problems these technologies might have solved. Mitchell's decision to preserve this evidence rather than deliver it to government facilities now appeared heroic rather than treasonous. The pilot had recognized that some discoveries belonged to all humanity, not just to government agencies that preferred control over progress. Elena's analysis confirmed that the recovered technology originated from sources far beyond human capabilities in 1974. The question that haunted Sarah's investigation was whether government officials had suppressed this knowledge to maintain political control, or whether they'd been protecting humanity from discoveries too dangerous to reveal. Either way, Captain Mitchell had died trying to preserve truth that powerful people had been willing to kill to protect. Sarah's investigation into Project Icarus required access to classified military archives that normal historians never saw. With Elena's technical analysis proving the extraordinary nature of Mitchell's cargo, Sarah needed to understand how the government had acquired such advanced technology in the first place. The National Archives classified section in College Park, Maryland, housed documents that might explain Project Icarus, but accessing them required security clearances that Sarah's academic credentials couldn't provide. Fortunately, her contact at the Pentagon, Colonel Morrison, had suggested she work with government archivist James Webb, who specialized in declassifying Cold War materials. Webb, a career civil servant approaching retirement, had spent 30 years managing the gradual release of classified documents as they aged beyond their security relevance. His expertise in navigating bureaucratic obstacles proved invaluable when Sarah encountered systematic resistance to her research requests. Project Icarus isn't in any databases I can access through normal channels, Webb admitted during their first meeting. But the classification codes on Mitchell's manifest suggest umbrella programs that I've seen referenced in other declassified materials. Webb's investigation revealed a pattern of hastily organized missions throughout the 1970s, all involving material recovery operations at locations across the southwestern United States. The top-secret memorandum he discovered buried in Air Force archives provided the smoking gun Sarah's team needed to understand Mitchell's final assignment. The memorandum, dated 3 weeks before Mitchell's disappearance, ordered immediate transport of recovered materials from Nevada research facilities to secure storage locations. The language was deliberately vague, but the urgency suggested crisis management rather than routine cargo transfer. Someone had needed these materials moved quickly and quietly. Webb's analysis of the document's classification markings revealed security levels that exceeded normal military protocols. The memorandum bore clearance requirements that suggested presidential authorization, placing Project Icarus among the most sensitive operations of the Cold War era. "This isn't just military classification," Webb explained to Sarah. "These markings indicate compartmentalized information that required special access permissions from civilian oversight committees. Whatever they were moving, it involved agencies beyond just the Air Force." The memorandum referenced other similar recovery operations spanning several years. Webb found evidence of material transfers from crash sites in New Mexico, Nevada, and Arizona locations that matched reports of unexplained aircraft incidents during the same time period. The government had been systematically collecting and studying technology from sources they couldn't publicly acknowledge. Sarah's examination of the document revealed Mitchell's specific role in the broader operation. His transportation missions represented the final phase of a multi-year program to consolidate recovered materials at a single secure facility. The pilot had been carrying the last batch of artifacts before Project Icarus transitioned from recovery to research phases. Webb's security clearance allowed him to access related documents that provided context for the memorandum's urgency. Congressional oversight committees had begun asking questions about unaccounted defense spending on projects they couldn't identify. Project Icarus needed to complete its material consolidation before political pressure forced public disclosure of the program's existence. The timing explained Mitchell's moral crisis. The pilot had been ordered to complete his mission before congressional investigators could examine what the government had been hiding from civilian oversight. His transportation run represented the last opportunity to suppress evidence of discoveries that elected officials had never authorized or approved. Webb discovered that similar material recovery missions had ended in other unexplained disappearances. 3 pilots over a 5-year period had vanished while transporting classified cargo, their aircraft never found, their missions officially attributed to mechanical failures or pilot error. Mitchell wasn't the only person who had chosen preservation over delivery. The memorandum's references to civilian oversight concerns revealed that some government officials had wanted Project Icarus materials shared with scientific institutions for open research. Military commanders had opposed such transparency, preferring to maintain exclusive control over discoveries that might revolutionize warfare capabilities. Sarah realized that Mitchell's decision to preserve the cargo represented a compromise between competing visions of how humanity should handle extraordinary discoveries. Instead of delivering the materials to military facilities for weapons development, or allowing them to disappear into government secrecy, he'd chosen to preserve them for future generations who might be wiser about their use. Webb's research confirmed that Project Icarus had been terminated shortly after Mitchell's disappearance. The program's files were sealed under national security provisions that prevented even presidential administrations from accessing them without specific congressional authorization. The materials Mitchell died protecting had been officially declared too dangerous for democratic oversight. The investigation now understood that Mitchell's sacrifice had been part of a larger struggle between military secrecy and civilian accountability that continued to influence government policy 50 years later. The breakthrough in Sarah's investigation came from an unexpected source. David Park, a retired radar operator from Edwards Air Force Base, contacted her team after seeing news coverage of Mitchell's discovery. For 50 years, Park had carried the burden of classified information that might have saved the pilot's life. Park, now 73 and battling cancer, decided that approaching death freed him from oaths of secrecy that had haunted him for half a century. His decision to come forward provided Sarah's team with evidence that government officials had actively suppressed during their original investigation of Mitchell's disappearance. "I was on duty the night Captain Mitchell disappeared," Park explained during his interview with Sarah. "My radar station tracked his aircraft deviating from the assigned flight path. But when I reported the deviation, my commanding officer ordered me to ignore it and delete the tracking data from our logs." Park's testimony revealed systematic suppression of evidence that could have led search teams to Mitchell's location. Military officials hadn't just failed to find the missing pilot. They'd actively prevented discovery by eliminating radar records that showed his actual flight path toward the mountains where his aircraft was eventually found. The retired radar operator had hidden his own copy of the tracking data, violating direct orders because he couldn't accept that a fellow serviceman's life was being sacrificed for operational security. The hidden audio recording device he'd used to preserve Mitchell's final radio transmissions provided the most damning evidence yet of government complicity in the pilot's disappearance. The recording revealed that Mitchell hadn't suffered mechanical failure or navigational error. His final transmission described being pursued by unidentified aircraft that had appeared on his radar scope shortly after he deviated from his assigned route. The pilot's voice conveyed determination rather than panic as he described his attempt to evade pursuit and reach the mountain cave he'd apparently identified as a potential hiding place. "Unknown aircraft closing on my position," Mitchell's voice crackled through the static of the 50-year-old recording. "Appears to be military intercept pattern. Cargo is too important to risk capture. Proceeding to emergency cache location as planned." Park's revelation that Mitchell had planned an emergency cache location proved that the pilot's deviation wasn't spontaneous panic but deliberate strategy. Mitchell had prepared for the possibility that he might need to hide his cargo rather than complete delivery to government facilities he'd learned to distrust. The radar operator's testimony explained why official search efforts had failed so completely. Military commanders knew approximately where Mitchell had gone, but they couldn't authorize search operations without revealing that they'd been pursuing their own pilot rather than attempting rescue operations. Park described the intimidation he'd faced after preserving evidence of Mitchell's final flight. Threats from superior officers, transfer orders that isolated him from his normal duties, and clear warnings that his career would be destroyed if he discussed what he'd witnessed. The pressure had been so intense that Park had never told his own family about the recording he'd hidden for 50 years. The audio device itself was a primitive tape recorder that Park had modified to capture radio transmissions during his shifts. Military regulations prohibited such recording, but Park had used the device to create backup logs that protected him from accusations of negligent duty performance. His habit of recording radio traffic had accidentally preserved the only evidence of Mitchell's final hours. Sarah's team analyzed the recording with modern audio enhancement technology, revealing details that Park couldn't have detected with 1970s equipment. Background radio chatter suggested that multiple aircraft had been involved in pursuing Mitchell, coordinated by ground control stations that weren't identified in any official flight logs from that night. The enhanced audio revealed Mitchell's growing desperation as he realized that his own government was treating him as an enemy rather than a loyal officer carrying out assigned duties. His final transmissions suggested that he'd discovered something about Project Icarus that government officials considered too dangerous to allow reaching its intended destination. Park's decision to preserve the recording had been motivated by his conviction that someday the truth about Mitchell's disappearance would matter to people who cared more about justice than operational security. His 50-year silence had protected him from retaliation, but approaching death made him determined to honor his fallen colleague's memory by revealing evidence that might vindicate the pilot's sacrifice. The radar operator's testimony transformed Sarah's understanding of Mitchell's final night. Instead of a pilot suffering mechanical failure or navigational confusion, they now knew Mitchell had been a whistleblower attempting to preserve evidence while being hunted by the very government he'd spent his career serving with distinction. Helen Mitchell's revelation came during Sarah's second visit to the retirement community in Phoenix. The elderly widow had spent the week after their first meeting searching through personal belongings she'd preserved for 50 years, hoping to find items that might help Sarah's investigation. Hidden in the false bottom of James Mitchell's military footlocker, Helen discovered a collection of service medals that told a different story than his official military record. The Purple Heart, Bronze Star, and Distinguished Flying Cross spoke of combat service that his personnel file never mentioned, suggesting classified operations that remained secret even after his death. But the most significant discovery was hidden beneath the medal collection itself. James had created a secret compartment containing photographs that documented his final mission preparations. The images showed classified cargo being loaded into his aircraft under extraordinary security measures that exceeded normal military protocols. James never talked about taking these pictures, Helen explained to Sarah, her aged hands trembling as she handled the photographs. I found his camera hidden in our bedroom closet after he disappeared, but I never had the film developed. I was too frightened of what I might see. The photographs revealed cargo loading procedures that violated standard military safety protocols. Instead of normal loading equipment, specialized containment systems suggested materials that required extraordinary protective measures. Personnel wore protective suits typically reserved for handling radioactive or biological hazards, despite the cargo manifest listing only electronic components. Sarah's examination of the photographs provided visual evidence that corroborated Elena's analysis of the recovered materials. The loading procedures documented in James's pictures matched the sophisticated containment systems they'd found in his aircraft, proving that government officials had known about the cargo's unusual properties before ordering his transport mission. Helen's testimony about her husband's behavior during his final weeks provided crucial insight into his psychological state. James hadn't been suffering from paranoid delusions or career burnout. He'd been methodically documenting evidence of activities that troubled his conscience as a military officer and American citizen. He spent hours in his workshop those last few nights, working on something he wouldn't discuss, Helen remembered. I thought he was repairing radio equipment, but now I think he was preparing recording devices to document his final mission. The photographs included images of James installing hidden cameras in his aircraft's cargo compartment. The installation work had been conducted at their home rather than on the military base, suggesting that he'd wanted to document the cargo without official knowledge or approval from his commanding officers. Helen revealed that James had given her specific instructions about his personal effects if he failed to return from his mission. She was to wait exactly 1 year before accessing his hidden materials, then decide whether the evidence should be preserved or destroyed based on political developments she might not understand at the time. He told me that someday people would need to know what he discovered, but that the timing would be crucial for everyone's safety, Helen explained. He said the truth was more dangerous than anyone realized, but that hiding it forever would be even more dangerous. The medal collection itself told a story of exceptional service that government officials had deliberately obscured. James's decorations indicated combat operations in Southeast Asia that weren't reflected in his official service record, suggesting participation in classified missions that remained compartmentalized even within military archives. Sarah realized that James Mitchell hadn't been a typical transport pilot assigned to routine cargo delivery. His classified combat experience had prepared him for the kind of dangerous mission that Project Icarus represented, making him an ideal choice for transporting materials that lesser pilots might not have handled successfully. The photographs documented not just cargo loading procedures, but also the identities of personnel involved in the operation. Faces visible in the background included scientists and military officials whose participation in Project Icarus could be verified through other investigation channels. Helen's decision to preserve rather than destroy her husband's hidden materials had been influenced by her growing conviction that his disappearance was connected to broader government activities that threatened democratic accountability. Her intuition about the importance of preserving evidence had been vindicated by Sarah's investigation 50 years later. The discovery transformed Helen from a grieving widow into a crucial witness whose testimony could expose decades of government deception. Her husband's photographs provided documentary evidence that government officials had lied about the nature of his final mission and the circumstances surrounding his disappearance. Sarah understood that Helen's courage in preserving dangerous evidence had made the current investigation possible. Without the photographs and her detailed memories of James's final preparations, the truth about Project Icarus might have remained buried forever. The government's response to Sarah's investigation escalated dramatically when her team began comparing official accident reports with the evidence they discovered in Mitchell's cave. What they found was a systematic pattern of deception that extended far beyond one missing pilot. The falsified accident report for Flight 447 claimed mechanical failure as the primary cause of Mitchell's disappearance, but every detail contradicted the physical evidence Sarah's team had recovered. The aircraft's maintenance logs had been altered, radar tracking data had been deleted, and witness testimonies had been suppressed or discredited. Most damning was the discovery that the accident investigation had been concluded within 72 hours of Mitchell's disappearance, impossibly fast for a legitimate investigation of a missing military aircraft. The report's authors had reached their conclusions before search teams could have possibly examined all potential crash sites or recovered significant wreckage. Investigative journalist Marcus Riley had been tracking similar cases for 20 years, documenting a pattern of military aircraft disappearances that defied statistical probability. His research revealed that between 1972 and 1978, 17 military pilots had vanished while transporting classified cargo, their aircraft never found, their missions officially attributed to pilot error or mechanical failure. Riley's files contained evidence that Sarah's academic resources couldn't access. Through Freedom of Information Act requests and leaked documents from whistleblowers, he'd assembled a database of incidents that suggested systematic suppression of military personnel who discovered uncomfortable truths about government operations. Captain Mitchell wasn't unique, Riley explained during his meeting with Sarah's team. He was part of a pattern. Pilots who asked too many questions about their cargo, who documented irregularities in their assignments, who showed signs of moral conflict about their missions, they had a disturbing tendency to disappear permanently. Riley's investigation had identified common elements in the disappeared pilots' backgrounds. All had been selected for classified transport missions based on their exceptional service records and security clearances. All had shown signs of growing unease about their assignments in the weeks before their disappearances. And all had been silenced before they could share their concerns with civilian oversight authorities. The journalist's research revealed that the falsified accident reports followed identical patterns. Vague references to mechanical failure, weather complications, or navigational errors that couldn't be verified due to missing wreckage. Investigation teams that concluded their work suspiciously quickly, filing reports that discouraged further inquiry. Sarah's comparison of the official Flight 447 report with Riley's database revealed that the document had been written using template language found in other falsified accident reports. Entire paragraphs were virtually identical to explanations used for different disappearances, suggesting that government officials had developed standardized procedures for concealing the truth about missing pilots. The cover-up extended beyond just falsifying accident reports. Riley's research showed that family members of disappeared pilots faced systematic intimidation designed to discourage them from pursuing independent investigations. Military death benefits were processed quickly to encourage acceptance of official explanations, while any family members who questioned the circumstances found themselves subject to security investigations and social isolation. Helen Mitchell's experience matched the pattern Riley had documented. The prompt processing of her widow's benefits, the discouragement of media attention, and the subtle pressure to accept the official explanation without asking uncomfortable questions. Her decision to preserve James's hidden evidence had required courage that most military families couldn't summon when facing government pressure. Sarah realized that her investigation threatened to expose not just Project Icarus but an entire system of suppression that had silenced dozens of potential whistleblowers over decades. The government's resistance to her research wasn't about protecting one classified operation. It was about preventing exposure of systematic murder disguised as accidents. Riley's documentation proved that government officials had developed institutionalized procedures for eliminating military personnel who discovered activities that couldn't withstand public scrutiny. Project Icarus represented just one example of operations protected by the systematic suppression of inconvenient witnesses. The falsified accident report for Flight 447 contained technical errors that proved its authors hadn't examined actual aircraft wreckage or conducted legitimate investigations. Weather data cited in the report didn't match National Weather Service records for Mitchell's flight date, while mechanical failure scenarios described problems that Mitchell's aircraft model had never experienced in operational service. Sarah's team understood that exposing the falsified accident report would validate their investigation while simultaneously revealing government complicity in Mitchell's death. The document represented proof that officials had chosen to murder a loyal military officer rather than risk exposure of activities they knew violated both military ethics and civilian oversight requirements. The investigation had evolved beyond historical research into active confrontation with government agencies that continued to suppress evidence of their crimes 50 years after Mitchell's sacrifice. Sarah's team now faced the same dangers that had killed the pilot they were trying to vindicate. The escalation began with a phone call that Sarah received at 3 in the morning. The voice was calm, professional, and carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Dr. Chen, Your research into historical aviation incidents has attracted attention from agencies that prefer to maintain operational security, the caller explained. We strongly advise suspending your current investigation in the interests of national security. Sarah's response was immediate defiance. Captain Mitchell deserves justice, and the American people deserve the truth about what their government has been hiding for 50 years. The caller's tone remained pleasant, but carried an underlying threat that chilled Sarah despite her determination. Some truths are too dangerous for public consumption, Dr. Chun. We hope you'll reconsider your position before circumstances require more direct intervention. Within hours of the threatening call, Sarah's team discovered that their research had been compromised. Government agencies were using administrative pressure to limit their access to evidence and witnesses. Federal facilities that had cooperated with the investigation suddenly claimed that materials were restricted or had been transferred to facilities requiring higher security clearances. The pressure extended beyond bureaucratic obstacles. Elena Vasquez received visits from federal agents who questioned her about her analysis of the recovered technology. The agents didn't explicitly threaten her, but their questions about her family's immigration status and her university's federal research funding carried clear implications about consequences for continued cooperation with Sarah's investigation. Marcus Riley faced more direct intimidation. His newspaper received calls from advertisers threatening to withdraw support if he published articles about government cover-ups that couldn't be substantiated through official sources. Riley's editor, initially supportive of his investigation, began expressing concerns about legal liability and national security implications. But the most significant development came when retired NSA analyst Robert Cruz contacted Sarah through encrypted communication channels. Cruz had spent 30 years working inside the intelligence community before retiring to a small farm in Montana, and his decision to come forward represented extraordinary personal risk. "I've been following your investigation through unofficial channels," Cruz explained during their clandestine meeting at a truck stop outside Las Vegas. "What you've discovered about Project Icarus represents just the surface of activities that some people have killed to protect." Cruz revealed the existence of a shadow program that had operated within the intelligence community since the 1940s, tasked with retrieving and studying technology that couldn't be publicly acknowledged. The program's unofficial name was Prometheus, and its activities extended far beyond the material recovery operations that Mitchell had documented. Mitchell's emergency beacon, which Cruz had examined through intelligence channels, had been deliberately disabled using techniques that required insider knowledge of military communication systems. The beacon's modification proved that government officials had actively prevented Mitchell's rescue rather than failing to locate him due to technical limitations. The beacon was programmed to send distress signals on frequencies that weren't monitored by standard search and rescue teams, Cruz explained. Mitchell was essentially screaming for help on channels that only intelligence agencies could hear, and they chose to ignore his calls rather than risk exposure of what he was carrying. Cruz's revelation transformed Sarah's understanding of Mitchell's final weeks. The pilot hadn't just been documenting irregularities in his cargo assignments. He'd been systematically gathering evidence of a program that violated both congressional oversight and constitutional limitations on government secrecy. The intelligence analyst's testimony proved that Mitchell's decision to preserve his cargo rather than complete delivery had threatened to expose decades of illegal activities. The materials he'd been transporting represented physical evidence of the Prometheus program's existence, which intelligence officials considered too dangerous to allow reaching congressional oversight committees. Cruz described the systematic intimidation that intelligence agencies used to suppress potential whistleblowers. Financial pressure, career destruction, family threats, and when necessary, permanent elimination disguised as accidents or health problems. Mitchell's disappearance represented standard operating procedure for dealing with military personnel who discovered activities that couldn't withstand public scrutiny. Sarah realized that her investigation had moved beyond historical research into active confrontation with intelligence agencies that continued to operate without meaningful civilian oversight. The evidence she'd gathered threatened not just to vindicate Mitchell's memory, but to expose systematic violations of democratic accountability that continued to the present day. Cruz's decision to come forward had been motivated by his growing conviction that the Prometheus program represented a threat to American democracy that exceeded any foreign enemy. intelligence agencies accountable to no civilian authority, conducting operations funded through unacknowledged budgets, suppressing evidence of discoveries that could benefit all humanity. The investigation now faced the same suppression mechanisms that had killed Mitchell 50 years earlier, but with one crucial difference. Modern communication technology made complete suppression more difficult to achieve. Mitchell's diary entries from his final days painted a detailed picture of a pilot who understood he was walking into a trap but felt morally obligated to preserve evidence that might save future lives. Sarah's team worked through the night, reconstructing the captain's final flight through his personal navigation charts and handwritten notes that revealed careful planning rather than desperate improvisation. The navigation charts showed Mitchell's intended route from Edwards Air Force Base to the classified Nevada facility, but more importantly, they revealed his backup plan. Handwritten notes in the margins documented alternate landing sites that Mitchell had researched during previous flights through the Sierra Nevada mountains. Emergency Cache Alpha Limestone Cave System, GPS coordinates 37.2431 degrees north, 118.5886 degrees west. Mitchell had written beside detailed notes about the cave's accessibility and concealment capabilities, natural preservation conditions, defensible position, suitable for long-term storage of sensitive materials. Sarah realized that Mitchell's choice of the mountain cave hadn't been random desperation but careful selection based on months of preparation. The pilot had been planning his preservation operation long before his final mission, understanding that someday he might need to choose between completing his orders and protecting evidence of government activities that violated his oath as a military officer. Mitchell's flight planning revealed sophisticated understanding of radar coverage gaps and communication dead zones that would allow him to deviate from his assigned route without immediate detection. His notes included timing calculations that showed when pursuit aircraft could reach his position, giving him narrow windows of opportunity to reach his prepared hiding place. The diary entries from Mitchell's final week described his growing certainty that Project Icarus represented activities that threatened not just military ethics but civilian oversight of intelligence operations. His decision to document everything wasn't motivated by personal ambition or whistleblower fame. It was driven by his conviction that democratic accountability required preservation of evidence that government officials were determined to suppress. If they're willing to kill me to protect these secrets, then these secrets are too dangerous to trust to people willing to commit murder. Mitchell had written 3 days before his disappearance. The American people deserve to know what their government has discovered and what they're doing with that knowledge. Mitchell's navigation planning included detailed contingencies for survival in the mountain cave. His supply calculations showed preparation for weeks of concealment, with rationing schedules and water collection systems designed to sustain him while he documented everything he'd learned about the Prometheus program. The pilot's personal notes revealed his understanding that survival wasn't his primary objective, preservation of evidence was. Mitchell had calculated that his personal sacrifice might be necessary to ensure that future investigators could uncover the truth about activities that current government officials were determined to suppress permanently. Sarah's reconstruction of Mitchell's final flight showed remarkable flying skill combined with desperate courage. The pilot had navigated through mountain terrain in adverse weather conditions while being pursued by military aircraft, reaching his prepared cache location with minimal fuel reserves and maximum determination to complete his preservation mission. Mitchell's diary described his realization during the final approach that he might never leave the mountain cave alive. But rather than feeling defeated, his final entries conveyed satisfaction that he'd successfully preserved evidence that might someday expose the Prometheus program's violations of democratic accountability. "I've done what I could to protect the truth," Mitchell wrote in his final entry. "Someone will find this someday, and they'll have the evidence needed to hold these people accountable for what they've done. That's worth more than one pilot's life." The navigation charts included Mitchell's analysis of how government search teams would attempt to locate his aircraft. His notes showed sophisticated understanding of search and rescue procedures, allowing him to choose a hiding place that would remain concealed until technology and circumstances allowed proper investigation of his preservation efforts. Sarah's team understood that Mitchell's final flight represented more than just preservation of classified materials. It was an act of faith that future generations would value truth over convenience, justice over security, and democratic accountability over government secrecy. The pilot's careful planning proved that his sacrifice had been deliberate rather than desperate, calculated rather than emotional. Mitchell had transformed himself from loyal military officer into guardian of evidence that powerful people were willing to kill to suppress. His navigation charts and flight planning documents provided Sarah's investigation with a roadmap for understanding not just what Mitchell had preserved, but why he'd considered that preservation worth his life. The most heartbreaking aspect of Sarah's investigation was reconstructing Mitchell's weeks of survival in the mountain cave through his increasingly desperate diary entries and the makeshift shelter materials that surrounded his final resting place. The pilot had transformed aircraft components and parachute fabric into a survival system designed for long-term concealment rather than rescue. Mitchell's engineering background had served him well in creating a livable space within the cave's natural chambers. Parachute fabric formed insulated walls that retained body heat while camouflaging the interior from casual observation. Aircraft wiring provided a basic electrical system powered by salvaged batteries, allowing him to operate his radio equipment and documentation cameras for weeks after his arrival. The diary entries from his first week in the cave reflected optimism and determination. Mitchell believed that exposing the Prometheus program would vindicate his decision to preserve the evidence rather than complete his delivery mission. His detailed documentation of the cave's environment showed scientific methodology that would help future investigators understand exactly what he'd preserved and why. Day 3 in the cache. Cargo remains secure in controlled environment. Have established communication protocols and documentation procedures. Radio monitoring suggests pursuit has been discontinued. Beginning systematic cataloging of materials for future recovery. Mitchell wrote with the precision of a man convinced his sacrifice would serve a greater purpose. But as days turned into weeks, Mitchell's entries revealed growing awareness that rescue wasn't coming and that his survival supplies wouldn't last indefinitely. His engineering calculations showed careful rationing of food and water, extending his operational time to maximize documentation efforts rather than mere survival. The makeshift shelter revealed Mitchell's priorities during his final weeks. Instead of focusing exclusively on survival, he devoted significant effort to preserving and organizing the evidence he'd rescued from government suppression. Waterproof containers protected documents, while improvised camera equipment documented everything from multiple angles. Mitchell's diary described his growing physical deterioration with the same scientific precision he applied to cataloging the Prometheus materials. Weight loss, vitamin deficiency symptoms, and the gradual failure of his improvised heating system created a countdown that he tracked with disturbing objectivity. Day 23. Physical condition declining but documentation remains complete. Have recorded video testimony explaining decision rationale and providing context for recovered materials. Future investigators will understand why preservation was necessary despite personal cost. Mitchell wrote as his handwriting became increasingly unsteady. Sarah's team found evidence of Mitchell's attempts to signal for rescue during his early weeks in the cave. Improvised radio equipment had transmitted distress calls on multiple frequencies, but Robert Cruz's intelligence analysis proved that government agencies had monitored and ignored these transmissions rather than responding with rescue operations. The pilot's final attempts at communication revealed his growing understanding that government officials preferred his death to his rescue. Radio logs showed Mitchell's transition from requesting assistance to simply documenting his location and the importance of the materials he'd preserved for future discovery. Mitchell's diary entries from his final week reflected acceptance rather than despair. The pilot understood that his personal survival was less important than ensuring the evidence would eventually reach people who could use it to expose the Prometheus program's violations of democratic accountability. I've done what I could to preserve the truth about what our government has been hiding from the American people. Mitchell wrote in an entry dated just days before his death. Someone will find this cache someday, and they'll have everything needed to hold these people accountable for their crimes against democracy. The shelter materials showed Mitchell's systematic preparation for his own death. Personal effects were organized for easy discovery, while his documentation was arranged in logical sequence that would help future investigators understand the significance of what they'd found. Even in dying, Mitchell was thinking like an intelligence officer focused on mission completion. Sarah's examination of Mitchell's final resting place revealed a man who died with dignity intact and mission accomplished. The pilot had successfully preserved evidence that government officials were willing to commit murder to suppress, ensuring that truth would eventually overcome systematic deception. The makeshift shelter represented more than survival equipment. It was a monument to one man's conviction that democratic accountability required personal sacrifice when government officials chose secrecy over truth. Mitchell had transformed his final weeks from mere survival into active resistance against institutional corruption. His diary's final entries conveyed satisfaction that he'd completed his preservation mission successfully, protecting evidence that might prevent future government officials from eliminating inconvenient witnesses with the same impunity they'd exercised against him. The government's response to Sarah's investigation reached a new level of intensity when federal agencies delivered an official cease and desist order demanding immediate suspension of all research activities related to Captain Mitchell's disappearance. The legal document claimed that continued investigation threatened ongoing national security operations and could result in criminal prosecution of Sarah's entire team. The cease and desist order represented more than bureaucratic intimidation. It was a formal acknowledgement that Sarah's investigation had uncovered evidence that current government officials considered dangerous enough to suppress through legal threats. The document's classification markings suggested presidential authorization, placing the suppression effort at the highest levels of government. Sarah's first response was to contact civil rights attorney Patricia Gomez, whose expertise in challenging government overreach had made her a target for intelligence agencies seeking to suppress whistleblower cases. Gomez's reputation for fearless representation of clients facing federal intimidation made her the ideal advocate for protecting Sarah's constitutional right to pursue historical research. This cease and desist order is legally meaningless, Gomez explained during their emergency meeting. Government agencies can't suppress historical research about 50-year-old events simply by claiming national security concerns. But they can make your life very difficult while we fight their intimidation through the courts. Gomez's analysis of the legal document revealed procedural irregularities that suggested the order had been issued without proper authorization. The classification markings were inconsistent with standard government protocols, while the legal reasoning cited statutes that didn't apply to academic research conducted on private property using publicly accessible materials. The attorney's experience with similar cases provided Sarah's team with strategies for continuing their investigation while protecting themselves from retaliation. Gomez arranged for secure communication channels, offshore data storage, and media contacts who could publicize the government's suppression efforts if intimidation escalated beyond legal threats. Sarah's decision to continue her research despite the cease and desist order was motivated by her growing understanding that Mitchell's sacrifice had been designed to prevent exactly this kind of government suppression. The pilot had preserved evidence specifically to enable future investigators to challenge official deception, and abandoning the investigation would invalidate his heroic sacrifice. The team's response was to accelerate rather than suspend their research activities. Elena Vasquez completed her analysis of the recovered technology and prepared detailed reports that could be released immediately if government pressure intensified. Marcus Riley arranged for simultaneous publication of his investigative articles through multiple media outlets that government agencies couldn't suppress simultaneously. Gomez's legal strategy focused on challenging the government's authority to suppress academic research about historical events that posed no legitimate national security threat. Her motion to invalidate the cease and desist order argued that government officials were using classification powers to conceal evidence of their own criminal activities rather than protecting legitimate secrets. The attorney's research revealed that similar suppression efforts had been used to silence other investigators who discovered evidence of the Prometheus program's activities. Legal challenges to previous cease and desist orders had been dismissed through secretive court proceedings that prevented public examination of the government's suppression methods. Sarah understood that her investigation had become a test case for whether American citizens could challenge government deception about historical events that revealed systematic violations of democratic accountability. The cease and desist order represented an admission that current officials were continuing to protect activities that their predecessors had been willing to commit murder to conceal. Gomez arranged for protective legal measures that would ensure Sarah's evidence reached the public even if government intimidation succeeded in silencing the investigation team. Deadman switches and automatic release protocols meant that suppressing the investigators would only accelerate public disclosure of Mitchell's preserved evidence. The legal battle surrounding the cease and desist order attracted attention from civil liberties organizations and congressional oversight committees who recognized the broader implications of government agencies claiming unlimited authority to suppress historical research. Sarah's case became a rallying point for advocates of government transparency and democratic accountability. Patricia Gomez's defiance of federal intimidation demonstrated that some attorneys were willing to risk their careers to protect citizens' rights to challenge government deception. Her representation of Sarah's team sent a clear message that the intelligence community couldn't suppress inconvenient evidence without facing legal consequences. The investigation had evolved beyond historical research into active resistance against government agencies that preferred institutional secrecy to democratic accountability. Sarah's refusal to accept the cease and desist order honored Mitchell's sacrifice while challenging the same suppression mechanisms that had killed him 50 years earlier. The legal confrontation proved that some truths were too important to suppress, even when government officials were willing to use every available intimidation technique to prevent public disclosure of their crimes against democracy. The investigation gained unexpected momentum when Congresswoman Maria Santos emerged as a powerful ally within the federal government. Santos, a former military prosecutor who specialized in oversight of intelligence operations, had been quietly monitoring Sarah's research through congressional intelligence channels and recognized the broader implications of the Mitchell case for democratic accountability. Santos contacted Sarah through secure channels after learning about the cease and desist order, offering the protection of congressional oversight authority to continue the investigation under official government auspices. Her intervention transformed Sarah's academic research into a formal congressional investigation with subpoena power and legal immunity from intelligence agency intimidation. Captain Mitchell's case represents systematic violations of congressional oversight that continue to threaten our democratic institutions, Santos explained during their clandestine meeting in her Capitol Hill office. Your investigation has uncovered evidence of activities that some intelligence officials never wanted Congress to discover. The Congresswoman's access to classified congressional hearing transcripts revealed the political context that had motivated the Prometheus program's creation and the subsequent cover-up of Mitchell's murder. Partially redacted documents showed that some elected officials had been aware of the technology recovery operations but had been systematically excluded from oversight of how that technology was being studied and applied. Santos shared a congressional hearing transcript from 1975 that documented lawmakers' frustration with intelligence agencies that claimed executive privilege to avoid answering questions about unaccounted defense spending. The hearing revealed that Project Icarus and similar operations had been funded through black budget allocations that prevented meaningful congressional oversight. Intelligence officials told us the operations were too sensitive for legislative review, Santos read from the transcript. They claimed that congressional oversight would compromise national security and endanger personnel involved in classified activities. We now know they were protecting criminal operations rather than legitimate intelligence activities. The congressional hearing transcripts proved that some elected officials had suspected intelligence agencies were conducting unauthorized activities, but had been prevented from investigating through claims of executive privilege and national security exemptions. Mitchell's preserved evidence provided the proof that congressional oversight committees had been seeking for decades. Santos revealed that her decision to champion government transparency had been motivated by her growing conviction that intelligence agencies had become unaccountable to civilian authority, conducting operations that violated both constitutional limitations and congressional oversight requirements. Mitchell's case represented an opportunity to reassert democratic control over agencies that preferred institutional secrecy to legal accountability. The Congresswoman's political influence provided Sarah's team with protection from further government intimidation while legitimizing their investigation through official congressional authority. Santos arranged for secure facilities where the team could complete their analysis without interference from intelligence agencies that had been trying to suppress their research. Santos shared intelligence from congressional allies who revealed that some government officials wanted Mitchell's evidence exposed because it would provide justification for long overdue reforms of intelligence operations. Not everyone within the government supported the institutional secrecy that had protected criminal activities for decades. There are people in every agency who believe that democratic accountability requires transparency about historical activities, even when that transparency embarrasses current officials, Santos explained. Your investigation has given us the evidence we need to demand reforms that some of us have been seeking for years. The Congresswoman's support attracted additional allies within the government who had been waiting for an opportunity to challenge intelligence agencies that claimed unlimited authority to suppress evidence of their own criminal activities. Santos's oversight committee gained access to classified materials that corroborated Sarah's findings while providing additional context for understanding the scope of the Prometheus program. Congressional hearing transcripts revealed that intelligence officials had systematically misled elected officials about the nature and scope of their technology recovery operations. Claims about national security necessities had concealed activities that violated both legal authorization and ethical limitations on government experimentation with recovered materials. Santos arranged for protective measures that would ensure Sarah's investigation could continue even if intelligence agencies escalated their suppression efforts. Congressional immunity and official oversight authority provided legal shields that individual investigators couldn't obtain through private legal representation. The Congresswoman's intervention proved that democratic institutions retained the authority to challenge intelligence agencies when elected officials found the courage to exercise their oversight responsibilities. Santos's willingness to risk her political career to support Sarah's investigation demonstrated that some government officials prioritized constitutional accountability over institutional convenience. The alliance between Sarah's academic research and Santos's congressional authority created a powerful combination that intelligence agencies couldn't suppress through their normal intimidation techniques. Official government support for exposing historical crimes provided legitimacy that transformed Sarah's investigation from potential security threat into patriotic duty. Santos's leadership proved that democratic accountability required elected officials willing to challenge intelligence agencies that preferred secrecy to transparency, even when that challenge threatened comfortable relationships between Congress and the intelligence community. With congressional protection secured through Santos's oversight committee, Sarah's investigation gained access to the complete mission file that revealed the full scope of the government's 50-year cover-up. The unredacted documents painted a disturbing picture of systematic deception that extended far beyond Project Icarus into a comprehensive program of suppressing evidence that could revolutionize human understanding of science and technology. The complete mission file contained operational records that proved intelligence agencies had been systematically retrieving and studying technology of extraterrestrial origin since the 1940s. Mitchell's final cargo represented just one shipment in a decades-long program to consolidate and weaponize discoveries that could have transformed civilian life if shared with the scientific community. Document after document revealed the staggering scope of what had been hidden from public knowledge. Energy technologies that could have eliminated fossil fuel dependence, medical discoveries that could have cured diseases, transportation innovations that could have revolutionized human mobility, all suppressed to maintain the geopolitical advantages that superior technology provided to military and intelligence operations. Sarah's analysis of the complete files showed that Mitchell's moral crisis had been fully justified. The pilot had discovered that his government was hoarding technological breakthroughs that could have solved many of humanity's most pressing problems, choosing military advantage over human progress. His decision to preserve rather than deliver the evidence represented a choice between institutional loyalty and humanitarian responsibility. The mission files revealed that other military personnel had reached similar conclusions about the ethics of suppressing revolutionary technology. Mitchell hadn't been unique in questioning whether democratic governments had the right to deny their citizens access to discoveries that could improve living conditions for everyone on Earth. Elena Vasquez's technical analysis gained new significance when compared to the complete documentation of what intelligence agencies had been studying for decades. The materials Mitchell had preserved represented only a small fraction of the technology that government scientists had been reverse engineering without sharing their discoveries with civilian researchers who could have accelerated the development process. The files documented systematic efforts to discredit scientists who independently developed theories that approached the principles underlying the recovered technology. Academic careers had been destroyed, research funding had been withdrawn, and in some cases, researchers had suffered accidents that prevented them from publishing work that might have revealed too much about the government's secret knowledge. Sarah realized that the cover-up had actively hindered human technological development by suppressing civilian research that might have led to independent discovery of the same principles that government scientists were studying in secret. The preservation of military advantage had required systematic sabotage of civilian scientific progress. The complete mission file contained evidence of international cooperation between allied governments in suppressing technological discoveries that could have eliminated many of the resource conflicts that had motivated wars throughout the 20th century. The technology existed to provide abundant clean energy, but revealing it would have destabilized the geopolitical order that gave certain nations advantages over others. Congressional oversight had been systematically excluded not just from operational details but from knowledge of the potential benefits that suppression was denying to American citizens. Elected officials had been told about national security necessities without being informed about the humanitarian opportunities that secrecy was preventing. The documents revealed that some intelligence officials had advocated for limited disclosure of beneficial technologies that could have improved civilian life without compromising military advantages. These proposals had been rejected by leadership that preferred total secrecy to any risk of revealing the full scope of what had been discovered and suppressed. Mitchell's preserved evidence proved that by 1974, government scientists understood principles of energy generation and materials science that could have revolutionized industry and eliminated many forms of environmental pollution. The pilot had died trying to prevent the continued suppression of knowledge that could have changed the trajectory of human civilization. The complete mission file transformed Sarah's investigation from historical research into an indictment of systematic crimes against humanity. The government hadn't just murdered one inconvenient pilot. It had denied all humanity access to discoveries that could have prevented decades of unnecessary suffering and environmental destruction. Congresswoman Santos's review of the complete files confirmed that current officials continued to maintain the suppression system that had cost Mitchell his life. The same institutional secrecy that had protected criminal activities in 1974 was still preventing democratic oversight of intelligence operations that might be continuing similar activities in the present day. The unredacted documents provided more than vindication for Mitchell's sacrifice. They revealed that his heroism had preserved evidence of crimes whose scope and consequences extended far beyond anything Sarah's team had initially imagined possible. The moment Sarah's investigation team decided to release their findings to the public, they knew there would be no turning back. Congresswoman Santos arranged for a joint press conference that would simultaneously present the evidence to major media outlets, while providing congressional legitimacy that intelligence agencies couldn't easily suppress through their normal intimidation techniques. The press conference took place in the Capitol building's largest briefing room, with representatives from every major news organization packed into a space that buzzed with anticipation. Sarah had spent weeks preparing for questions that would challenge both the credibility of her evidence and the implications of what they'd discovered about government activities spanning 7 decades. But the most powerful moment of the press conference came when they played Mitchell's final video message, recorded in the mountain cave during his last days of life. The captain had used his aircraft's emergency camera equipment to create a testament that spoke directly to the American people about the choice between institutional loyalty and moral responsibility. "My fellow Americans," Mitchell's image said from the screen, his face gaunt but his voice steady with conviction. "If you're watching this recording, it means that someone finally found the evidence I died to preserve. What I discovered about our government's activities represents a betrayal of everything I swore to protect when I took my military oath." The video continued for nearly 20 minutes, with Mitchell methodically explaining the Prometheus program's activities and the systematic suppression of technological discoveries that could have transformed human civilization. His calm, professional delivery provided credibility that no amount of academic analysis could have achieved. "I'm not a traitor or a conspiracy theorist," Mitchell explained to the camera. "I'm a career military officer who discovered that some government officials were willing to deny all humanity access to revolutionary technology in order to maintain geopolitical advantages for a select few. That's not national security. That's a crime against the human species." Mitchell's video message described his growing realization that completing his delivery mission would make him complicit in activities that violated both his military oath and his conscience as a human being. His decision to preserve the evidence rather than allow its continued suppression represented the ultimate act of patriotism, choosing service to humanity over service to institutional power. The captain's final words carried particular weight as he addressed future generations who would inherit the consequences of decisions made in secret by people who prioritized control over progress. The technology exists to solve many of the problems that cause human suffering. The only question is whether we'll have the courage to demand that our leaders share these discoveries instead of hoarding them for military advantage. The press conference erupted into chaos as reporters grasped the implications of Mitchell's testimony and the supporting evidence that Sarah's team had accumulated over months of investigation. Questions flew from every direction, challenging the credibility of the claims while demanding immediate government response to allegations that spanned multiple decades and presidential administrations. Sarah presented Elena's technical analysis alongside the recovered materials, providing physical evidence that supported Mitchell's extraordinary claims about suppressed technology. The combination of documented proof and expert testimony created a compelling case that even skeptical journalists found difficult to dismiss entirely. Marcus Riley's documentation of the systematic pattern of disappeared military personnel provided context that transformed Mitchell's case from isolated incident into evidence of institutional murder designed to protect criminal activities. His database of falsified accident reports and intimidated family members painted a disturbing picture of government agencies that eliminated inconvenient witnesses with bureaucratic efficiency. The media response was immediate and overwhelming. Major networks interrupted regular programming to report on revelations that challenged fundamental assumptions about government accountability and the pace of technological development. Social media amplified the story beyond any government agency's ability to suppress or control the narrative. International media picked up the story within hours, with foreign journalists asking questions about their own government's potential involvement in similar suppression activities. The revelations threatened to destabilize carefully maintained secrecy agreements between allied intelligence agencies that had been cooperating in technology suppression for decades. Government officials' initial response was predictable denial, but the volume and credibility of evidence made complete dismissal impossible. Official statements claiming national security necessities rang hollow when confronted with Mitchell's personal testimony and the documented proof of technologies that could have prevented decades of human suffering. The press conference achieved Mitchell's goal of ensuring that his sacrifice would expose the truth about activities that powerful people had been willing to kill to protect. 50 years after his death, the captain's voice finally reached the American people he had died trying to serve. The public outcry following Sarah's press conference forced congressional hearings that government officials could no longer avoid or suppress. Congresswoman Santos leveraged the media attention and public demand for accountability to convene formal oversight committees with subpoena power, compelling intelligence officials to testify under oath about activities they had hidden for decades. The congressional hearings attracted worldwide attention as elected officials finally gained access to classified programs that had operated without meaningful oversight since their creation. Witnesses included retired intelligence officers, former military personnel, and government scientists who had participated in the Prometheus program under conditions of absolute secrecy that prevented them from discussing their work with anyone outside the compartmentalized operations. Under congressional immunity, former program participants revealed the staggering scope of technological suppression that had characterized government policy for over 70 years. Energy technologies that could have eliminated fossil fuel dependence, medical discoveries that could have prevented millions of deaths, transportation innovations that could have revolutionized human mobility, all had been systematically suppressed to maintain geopolitical advantages for military and intelligence operations. The hearings forced government acknowledgement of activities that officials had previously denied or dismissed as conspiracy theories. Faced with overwhelming evidence and sworn testimony from program participants, intelligence agencies could no longer maintain plausible deniability about their role in suppressing revolutionary technologies that could have transformed human civilization. President Catherine Walsh, facing mounting political pressure and undeniable evidence of government wrongdoing, made the unprecedented decision to declassify selected materials related to historical technology suppression programs. Her administration's response included both acknowledgement of past activities and commitment to preventing similar suppression in the future. The presidential apology letter, delivered personally to Helen Mitchell during a White House ceremony, provided official recognition of her husband's heroism and sacrifice. The document acknowledged that Captain Mitchell had been murdered by government agents rather than dying in an aircraft accident, vindicating 50 years of Helen's insistence that the official explanation concealed more troubling truths. Captain James Mitchell died protecting evidence that revealed systematic violations of democratic accountability by intelligence agencies operating without proper oversight, President Walsh wrote in the formal apology. His sacrifice preserved truth that these hearings have finally brought to light, demonstrating courage that honored both his military oath and his responsibility to the American people. The presidential apology extended beyond Mitchell's individual case to acknowledge the broader pattern of suppression that had denied humanity access to beneficial technologies for decades. Walsh committed her administration to reviewing classified programs for materials that could be safely released to benefit civilian applications without compromising legitimate national security interests. Congressional hearings revealed that other families of disappeared military personnel deserved similar recognition and compensation for losses that government agencies had previously denied or attributed to accidents. The testimony exposed a systematic pattern of eliminating inconvenient witnesses that extended far beyond Project Icarus into other classified operations that violated both legal authorization and ethical limitations. Helen Mitchell's testimony before Congress provided emotional weight to the technical evidence that Sarah's investigation had assembled. The elderly widow's dignity and determination to honor her husband's memory demonstrated the human cost of government activities that had prioritized institutional secrecy over individual lives and democratic accountability. The Congressional Committee's final report recommended comprehensive reforms of intelligence oversight designed to prevent future suppression of beneficial technologies, while maintaining necessary protection for legitimate national security operations. The recommendations included civilian scientific review boards with authority to evaluate whether classified discoveries could benefit humanity without compromising military advantages. International pressure from allied governments forced acknowledgement that technology suppression had been a coordinated effort involving intelligence agencies from multiple nations. The revelations threatened long-standing secrecy agreements and prompted similar investigations in other countries where citizens demanded accountability for their own government's potential involvement in systematic suppression activities. The hearings established legal precedent for congressional authority to investigate historical intelligence activities, regardless of classification levels or claims of executive privilege. Santos's successful challenge to intelligence agency secrecy provided a framework for future oversight that could prevent similar violations of democratic accountability. Scientific institutions worldwide began reviewing their research programs for evidence of systematic interference or suppression that might have hindered technological development. The revelations prompted examination of academic careers that had been mysteriously derailed and research funding that had been inexplicably withdrawn when scientists approached discoveries that government agencies wanted to control. Captain Mitchell's posthumous recognition included promotion to full colonel and award of the Congressional Medal of Honor for extraordinary heroism in preserving evidence that exposed systematic violations of democratic principles. The recognition transformed him from officially disappeared pilot into national hero, whose sacrifice had defended constitutional accountability against institutional corruption. The vindication proved that Mitchell's faith in future generations had been justified, that someday people would value truth over convenience and democratic accountability over government secrecy. The memorial service for Captain James Mitchell took place on a crisp autumn morning at Arlington National Cemetery, with full military honors and attendance that reflected how completely his reputation had been transformed from disappeared pilot to national hero. The ceremony brought together an extraordinary gathering of people whose lives had been touched by his sacrifice and the investigation that finally vindicated his heroic choice. Helen Mitchell, now 90 years old but standing with remarkable dignity, received the folded flag from her husband's ceremonial casket, while military honor guards performed the ritual that had been denied to her family for 50 years. Her tears reflected not just grief for a husband lost decades earlier, but relief that his memory had finally been honored with the truth he died protecting. Sarah Chun stood nearby, reflecting on the investigation that had consumed 2 years of her life and fundamentally changed her understanding of how democratic institutions could be corrupted by institutional secrecy. The academic research that began with one missing pilot had exposed systematic violations of democratic accountability that spanned multiple generations of government officials. The memorial plaque installed at the Mountain Cave site bore simple words that captured the essence of Mitchell's sacrifice. Captain James Mitchell. He chose truth over orders. The bronze inscription would remind future visitors that sometimes the highest form of patriotism requires defying authority to preserve principles that transcend institutional loyalty. Congresswoman Santos delivered the memorial address, speaking to an audience that included military officials, congressional colleagues, and family members of other disappeared personnel whose cases had been reopened following Mitchell's vindication. Her words emphasized that Mitchell's legacy extended beyond individual heroism to institutional reforms that would prevent similar suppression of truth in the future. Captain Mitchell understood that serving his country sometimes meant protecting it from its own government, Santos told the assembled mourners. His sacrifice preserved evidence that has forced us to confront uncomfortable truths about how power operates in darkness and how democracy requires vigilant protection from those who prefer control to accountability. The mountain cave where Mitchell had preserved his evidence was designated as a National Historic Site, ensuring that future generations could visit the location where one man's courage had exposed decades of government deception. The site's interpretive center would educate visitors about the importance of whistleblower protection and civilian oversight of intelligence operations. Elena Vasquez's continued research into the recovered technology had already led to breakthrough discoveries that vindicated Mitchell's conviction about the beneficial applications that suppression had prevented. Clean energy innovations, medical advances, and materials science developments were beginning to emerge from the declassified materials, proving that the captain's sacrifice was enabling exactly the kind of human progress he had envisioned. Marcus Riley's investigative reporting had earned him a Pulitzer Prize for exposing government corruption, but more importantly, his documentation of systematic suppression had established legal precedents that protected future whistleblowers from the retaliation that had silenced previous truth-tellers. His work ensured that Mitchell's case would not be an isolated example of heroism, but the beginning of broader accountability for intelligence operations. Robert Cruz's decision to come forward had inspired other intelligence community veterans to reveal evidence of additional suppression programs, creating a cascade of disclosures that continued to expose activities that officials had never intended to acknowledge publicly. His courage in breaking decades of silence demonstrated that institutional loyalty should never supersede moral responsibility. David Park's preservation of the audio recording had provided crucial evidence that transformed the investigation, proving that sometimes individual acts of conscience can preserve truth through decades of official deception. His decision to finally speak after 50 years of silence honored his fallen colleague while contributing to justice that many people had never expected to see. The investigation's conclusion brought closure to Helen Mitchell, but it also opened new chapters in the ongoing struggle between government secrecy and democratic accountability. Sarah's work had demonstrated that determined citizens could challenge even the most sophisticated suppression efforts when they possessed courage, evidence, and institutional support from elected officials willing to exercise their oversight responsibilities. The memorial service concluded with the playing of taps, its haunting melody carrying across Arlington's rolling hills where thousands of other heroes rested in honored graves. But Mitchell's memorial carried special significance because his heroism had been revealed rather than recognized immediately, proving that truth has its own timeline that transcends the political calculations of those who try to suppress it. As the ceremony ended and visitors began to depart, Helen Mitchell remained beside her husband's grave marker, finally able to share with him the vindication she had hoped for during 50 years of waiting. The investigation was complete, the truth was revealed, and James Mitchell's sacrifice had achieved exactly what he had intended when he chose preservation over delivery in that mountain cave so many years earlier.